Opportunity for Erin Watson to share with us the evaluation. Um, and it was wonderful not only to be able to provide you with an overall evaluation, but also a customized report. And so, what we wanted to do today was to be able to let Erin really kind of unpack that report with you and help you think about how you could use it and how it can support your work. We know you have a lot going on with the work you're also doing to launch the wage supplement initiative. And so this is intended to help you really be efficient and effective with thinking about how to use your evaluation report. So, Erin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, let me quickly share my screen. Um, so let me just say it was lovely working with all of you this past grant period. It just felt like a really nice partnership, and I appreciate that everyone like leaned in with sharing really like honestly about what was going on, and it really has helped us get a good understanding of what are some of the like successes and lessons learned that are emerging from this whole thing. So I'm going to share. Can you all see my screen? Yep. Okay. I'm going to share kind of like the big highlights that I think are important for us to think through around application. And I've organized it into those theory of change elements that we've been using kind of from the beginning of this phase. So we're going to go through each one, and there's going to be a couple points in time where there'll be breakout groups where you can join at least one other coalition and use your customized report to think through some ideas for how you might want to apply these learnings to your work moving forward. All right, so let's dive into that first theory of change element, which was around coalitions' collaborative capacity. Um, and there was lots of stuff to talk about here. So again, I'm just going to kind of share some of the highlights, and you can go into that report for more. So overall, all coalitions added members. Yay! And all coalitions experienced some turnover in membership. It's just normal. Um, some coalitions had more representatives in certain sectors than others. There's a chart in the evaluation report that shows you kind of percentages, so you can get a sense of where were we at in terms of where certain sectors were showing up. And some coalitions had considerably more members attend their meetings on average than others. It ranged from like 14% of total members to 61% of the total roster. And so there's things to learn from those who have higher representation. Like what are you doing that's allowing that to happen? Or what are some contextual things we can learn from? There was also a lot of shared priorities in terms of the sectors folks want to prioritize and recruit for this next grant season. And in that customized report, I've indicated like in some gold highlighting where your priorities match up with other coalitions. And this is a great opportunity to work together, share resources, share learnings, because there's a lot of overlap in terms of the sectors folks want to recruit. Coalitions also experience some shared challenges to collaboration. They're listed in detail on page 20. But there are things like the timing of meetings and constraints on members' times and trying to reach and recruit individuals in really rural counties and counties in these very large regions, just having really unique identities and needs, and it can be difficult at times to create some shared unity. So there was a lot of shared challenge that I think everyone should take heart in, that you're not the only one. um, Fortunately, coalitions created a ton of strategies for how to overcome some of those challenges and build their collaborative capacity. So that customized report also, it pulls out this table from the evaluation report that lists all the different types of strategies coalitions use to promote engagement in their coalition. And it shows where you are working with other coalitions on similar strategies around similar issues. Those are in gold. And in blue, it shows where you weren't working on any strategies for areas where others were. And so again, lots of opportunities for learning, collaboration, etc. that can come out of that. You're going to have a chance to think about this in a few minutes when we do that breakout group, but that's how you use that table in the customized report. So I asked everyone about engagement insights throughout last grant period, and there were several that emerged that I think are important for us to reflect on. So I'm going to go through those, and again, these are things you can talk about in the breakout group in a few minutes. So first, coalitions talked about how it really requires strategic thinking and a strategic approach to effectively recruit and engage parents, specifically those parents with lived experiences that are relevant to this project. So some coalitions encountered some challenges with finding and recruiting parents for the coalition who actually were experiencing barriers to accessing affordable childcare versus parents who don't really have those barriers or may not even be seeking childcare at all. Like those latter parents have a perspective, but it may not be the right perspective to really understand the barriers we're trying to encounter. And so finding the right perspectives was challenging in some cases. Fortunately, several coalitions are using really kind of strategic approaches to find and recruit those priority parents. They're using existing parent networks. They're using parent engagement specialists. And many of those strategies are listed in that table we were just seeing. And I encourage you to look at that if you are encountering any challenges for recruitment. On the other end, in terms of engagement, some coalitions are also encountering challenges with engaging parents in the coalition work itself. So, for example, while in many coalitions, childcare providers and business owners are often very engaged, parent leaders may attend but aren't always as actively engaged in some of the discussions. However, in some cases, those parents are very vocal and participatory when the coalition hosts sort of separate discussion groups or focus groups that contain only parents. And you need to know that that preference for homogeneous groups is found in the literature. Like I've written articles about this in my own work, and you can see why, because it can be intimidating being in the same room with someone who often has power over some of the decisions that affect your life. And so there's just inherent power differentials that can often make it difficult for some parents to authentically engage. And so one strategy that you see in the literature and that some coalitions are starting to kind of think about is to create separate parent leader groups that provide that safe space for honest discussions. And then finding ways for the ideas and questions and priorities from those separate conversations to be then integrated and brought into the full coalition, and that the parent leaders feel like supported and prepared and confident to engage in those meetings. I know we've talked about that in some of the progress meetings we've had so far, but there's lots out there around resources to help do that type of engagement if you're interested. Okay, another insight is recruiting higher level organizational leaders can just reduce some of the delays in decision making versus if you engage folks who are kind of lower in the level of their organization who sometimes say, well, I have to bring it back to my leader. I can't make that decision here. This is also something you read about in the collaborative literature, that finding folks who have that decision-making power can just make the process go smoother, and some of the coalitions talked about that. This is a fascinating moment in history, some coalitions talked about the benefits of using strategic recruiting materials and messaging to counter some growing skepticism around like government that trying to distinguish the RCCC work apart from what folks consider as like the government, because some of that skepticism is starting to pose a barrier for participation. And so just being really sensitive to some of the broader dynamics happening in our country right now. Next, there's benefits to providing feasible engagement opportunities outside of like big coalition meetings. So several coalitions are using really creative ways to engage partners. For example, Region 4 has CEO roundtables where they kind of like spark new ideas And then they follow up with people who get really inspired and activated and provide support after those convenings so that they can kind of take and run with it. Other coalitions noted like other lighter touch engagement opportunities, either in work groups or other sessions. It's just a good alternative for people who might be more hesitant to like join the coalition, but still are interested in supporting the work. Uh, some coalitions found that regional champions can help to build momentum. So, for example, Region 2 talked about how one particular regional champion is really helping to address uneven participation in some of the regions. And there's just certain individuals who are showing up as really powerful, kind of like activators of others in the counties. And then finally, some coalitions, one in particular, talked about the importance of distributed leadership, given that turnover in leads and co-leads is just sort of an inherent challenge many of the coalitions are going to face. And the more that you kind of distribute some of the leadership across members, it can help to weather the transition in lead turnover. So again, lots more details in the report, but those were some of the things I thought were really useful for us to think about and harvest some of the great learning that's happening. Okay, so I've talked enough. This was like round one. We've got several more rounds. So let's do our first breakout group. And Misty, let's do this for 10 minutes. This first one, you might get like a bonus extra 2 minutes as we come in, but let's start with like 10 minutes. Pull up that customized report that you got and turn to page 2 to 4. That's where that big table is with all the engagement strategies. Just take a look and start thinking about what are some opportunities you're seeing for maybe shared learning and collaboration. And then if you get finished with that, pop over to pages 5 through 6, and you can talk a little bit about some of those engagement insights that I was just talking about. So we have 5 different breakout groups, and your coalition number is listed in the title of each. So when Misty launches those in a second, just find your group and join that, and then we'll bring you back in about 10 to 12 minutes.
The room should be launched and you can select now.
Hey, boy. Up by the door. Hey, yeah, go, go, go. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
If they aren't automatically showing up for you, since you'll have to select a room, just go to more and then breakout rooms on your Zoom platform if you don't see it.
Misty, if you make me a co-host, I can help to
Yep, I'm organizing everyone into their rooms now.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Magician.
I think I got everyone.
Okay.
Everyone who wouldn't be joining is still here.
Okay, so we have
Emma is
three break-
still in the main room.
oh, hey, Jordan.
I just reassigned Jordan. I reassigned Emma as well. Let me see.
Oh, there she
There
go.
she goes.
Okay. It might take a minute, I guess.
Okay, awesome.
Awesome.
So there's 3 breakout groups. I just want to make sure that I'm going to start lighter on this one, and then we can kind of extend it depending on how long it takes. I'm also going to give more time for questions in the next few sections. This one was so straightforward that I just kind of wanted to get through it. So the next thing is going to be strategies. And the biggest thing I want you guys to be watching for on people's faces is when I talk about the difference between strategies that are more likely to create sustainable change and less likely to create sustainable change. Because I think that's going to be the most like sort of uh, challenging one to look at and to just like absorb. Um, and their breakout groups will give them a chance to kind of think through that a little bit more. The next section is it's like shorter. So I'm going to go slower and give them some time to respond. But that's the big area that I think could have some reaction to. Uh, so we'll see what happens.
Confirming we're keeping the same breakout groups for that.
Confirmed.
Thank you.
And one of the things that they recommended was that the ECIC staff aren't involved in the breakout group, so it's good that we're here. If you want, I could jump into a couple and just see how it's going, and see how much time they need.
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want us to share all the evaluation reports with you? Okay. Misty,
would
could
be
we add that to
great.
Siebel?
I was going to ask how, Aaron, for those customized reports, are they essentially, is the difference from the whole report to those customized reports just the coloring, the
Correct.
shading?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. I don't need to look at all 10 then. I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
you
clear.
don't.
Okay,
Um,
great.
I was just thinking from a user standpoint, like someone would see that and be like, oh my God, I'm not going to read all this. But if it's
Yes,
color coded, maybe
yes.
you will.
Absolutely. Thanks for that.
We do have Jewel from Region 10 who needs to be assigned
Thanks
to
for
her.
flagging that, Joan.
Yep.
Sorry for my late arrival. I thought this
Oh.
meeting started at 3 because I had a meeting that ended at 2. So my apologies.
You're
No,
good.
No worries, Jewel.
no worries. We're always so glad to have you.
Thank you.
Yep, I'm
Thank you. Glad to
assigning
be
you to
here.
your room now, Jewel, so it should take you there.
Okay, thanks. Sorry again.
It's
You're
okay.
good.
Julia, do you think that you could go back and talk with Sarah and Mina and find out if you all would like to see all 10 regional evaluation reports to be able to look at the specific information that showed up in the evaluation related to parent leadership and engagement?
Yeah, I can ask him that. I'd be
All right.
interested just for my own perusing if that's something that can be shared.
I think if you're going to work on the project, it would make sense. Yeah.
Erin, every time you go into the research, I'm like, can Erin just teach a class and I can go to it and just listen and learn and engage?
Well, you got to get something out of.
I got disconnected. Could somebody put me back into the region
You know what,
center?
Emma, we're right about to come back to the full
Okay.
group, so no worries.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good timing to be disconnected. All right. Looks like everyone is back. All right, so I always feel bad like having these small breakout groups because I'm sure you just got into a good conversation when we had to cut it. Yeah, Kathy's like, of course. But you know, these are conversations that you can continue. And I heard there's this thing called the Cool Kids Club, and so there might be opportunities to bring some of these things up there. Just saying. So we're gonna have another breakout group, and I'm gonna ask you in a couple minutes if you want more time. So just kind of reflect in the content I'm going to talk about if you think you'd like a little bit more time to talk with your colleagues. Okay, let's talk about the second theory of change stage, which is around coalition strategies. So I looked across all of the strategies, both that folks prioritized in those like 3x5 note cards in the June in-person PLC, as well as just all the other things I've heard from people in the time between then and September. And overall, here's the number of strategies that coalitions initiated. And so I put little icons under the goal areas because sometimes I have a hard time remembering which is which. So goal 4 is around childcare business support. 5 is around childcare supply building. 6 is around the early childcare workforce. 7 is coordination and alignment of pre-K. Oops, hold on, let me move that over. Pre-K and childcare navigation resources. 8 is TriShare, and 9 is additional funding sources. So you can just kind of like use that as a shorthand. You'll see those icons a couple times. So these were how many strategies coalitions prioritized, not necessarily like all of the strategies that they're thinking about. These are just the ones they prioritized for implementation. And as you can see, goal area 5 had the most strategies that focused on general childcare supply building. And the strategies in that area focused on a lot of different topics because it's kind of a broad umbrella. And so I think the broad encompassing nature of that goal probably led to the most strategies in that area. That's my guess. Kind of in the middle are goal 4 and 9. So 4 is highly connected to the work of economic development, deals with business development supports, and this alignment could explain just the higher number of strategies that naturally would feel kind of intuitive for some of the key coalition leads and coalition members. And then goal 9 is also around leveraging additional funding. And this is always a big interest of any initiative, especially given some of the dynamics that have been happening in the state and the country. And so given that financial stability is just a big focus, it was not totally surprising that strategy had some more. The wage initiative pilot is also, I think, leaning into some of the focus there. Goal 7 was the least connected to the work of economic development. Has to do again with like navigation supports. And it also has kind of the least direct effect on supply building, focuses on coordinating and aligning pre-K. And so these factors might have contributed to less prioritized strategies in those areas, but still something to pay attention to. I always like looking at graphs like this and just having folks kind of think through what are the implications of where we're focusing. Not good or bad, but just there's implications. So goal area 7 is just going to have less work happening because it has less strategies. And it can be helpful to think about if there's a need to fine tune or rebalance our focus across some of the goal areas. All right. So as I was looking at the strategies, I went into the literature on systems change and really reflected on to what extent are these strategies designed in ways that are going to create long-term self-sustaining change versus strategies that are more likely to create shorter-term change and just have less power to kind of create those like long ripple effects, sustainable embedded changes into the system. And so I pulled out just some examples of strategies I saw in both of those categories. So on the left side, and kind of the lighter teal, are some strategies that, according to the literature, would have less power to create those long-term sustainable changes. Things like a one-time training, or asking philanthropists for funding in the form of like a one-time grant, or sharing information at like a one-time regional event, versus strategies I saw that seem to have more potential to create those long sustainable changes. Things like embedding business development into the curriculum of higher ed programs, or launching a campaign for like a millage or a levy to create sustainable funding mechanisms, or increasing the capacity of existing structures like the TriShare Hub to do outreach on an ongoing basis versus a one-time event. So I just wanted people to kind of like reflect on the differences between these strategies. And I also want to normalize like it's okay to have both, but it's concerning if all we have are the ones on the left, which can be helpful to kind of like build momentum and get things started. But unless we're also complementing those strategies on the left with more sustainable strategies, it can lead to a situation where there's a lot of work that happens, but then it kind of dies away over time. And so how can you ensure your strategies do create more of those sustainable changes? The key is to think about embedding. Like instead of a one-time training, how do you embed things like into a curriculum? Instead of asking for one-time funding, how do you think through what are the mechanisms that would continue operating even if our coalition went away tomorrow? And so those are just some food for thought and things that we can draw on from the literature to help us all think through how do we make our efforts create transformation and long-term sustainable changes in addition to getting a lot of momentum started. Any reactions folks have to some of those ideas? We can just take like a couple minutes if folks have any things that are top of mind.
So I just wanted to note kind of big picture how helpful it is to see everyone's strategies in this report together. And I think both just kind of again like from the big picture, it's really helpful to see other people's ideas and just be able to kind of share broadly. It's also prompting me to say, oh yeah, we did that too. And it's like a really good reminder to make sure we're tracking our activities well so that we can like pursue stronger reporting. So it's just really helpful overall.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh my gosh, you just made my heart like explode. So the more you send me, the more material I have to put in reports like this. And I can work with you to find really effective ways to get that information. Because I want to put as much in here as possible. And it's to all our benefit to share as much as we can so we can learn, just like what you were saying, Sarah. Okay. I'm gonna keep going just so we can get to our breakout group. So when I looked across all the strategies using that lens of kind of long-term sustainability, here's what I saw. So the darker teal are strategies that are designed to create those longer-term sustainable changes. The lighter teal were ones that were not as powerful to create those longer-term changes. And so you can see, you know, like for the most part, the majority of many of these goal areas had sustainable driven strategies, which is great. Again, just kind of looking at maybe goal 8 and goal 9, just to kind of reflect, are there ways that we can enhance the strategies that are being used to make them even more sustainable? And that's always my lens, is enhancement. I'm not about saying don't do a strategy. I'm about how can we use what we've learned from a lot of research done over the past like 50 years to enhance our ideas so that they're as powerful as we can make them. So in your customized report, just like Sarah was saying, I've listed out the strategies across all the coalitions and I organized them not only in goal area, but also in some outcome areas because I find it's helpful to think through like the ultimate purpose of your strategy to create outcomes versus just the strategies. So I took the liberty of kind of creating some shared outcome areas also. But in your report, your strategies are listed in yellow highlight. So like Sarah was saying, you can kind of see who are the other people doing work in similar areas that I am. How might I learn from them? And you'll also see that strategies that in my assessment, given the literature, seem to be designed to create those longer term sustainable changes have an asterisk after them. So you can also kind of get a sense of those dynamics happening. So let's go back into a breakout group. This should feel a little bit like the rhythm we did at the June in person, where I'm going to show you some things and then you can talk. So I want you to turn to page 7 through 10 of your customized report, because that's where all of those strategies Sarah was mentioning are listed, highlighted again for your own coalition. And I just want you to both think about who else might we want to reach out to and create some like action steps. Hey, we need to reach out to Coalition Blank because they're really doing some stuff like us. Like create some plans to reach out to them. And also reflect on ways to maybe enhance some of the strategies that don't have an asterisk around them, given what we've talked about. So we had 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes in this last round. Can people just give me, I'm going to do like the Hollywood Squares really quick. Can people give me a sense if they want more time or if that was, if you want more time than what you had before, put a thumbs up. If you feel like, that was okay, the 10 minutes felt like a good thing, just don't put anything up. How many folks feel like they need a little bit more time? Okay, like folks like went like this really quick. Can you like hold your thumbs up if you feel like you need to pretend? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. About half. Why don't we give you, I'm gonna be generous and give you 2 more minutes. So let's do this for 13 minutes, Misty, knowing they get another 60 seconds before they have to come back.
Sable's gonna help with running the rooms, but I'm gonna not leave until she's all set. So she's gonna
Perfect.
set them for 13 minutes.
Thank you. All right, jump back in. Okay, they're all in. All right, are we back? Yep. Okay. Welcome back. Still see my screen, right? Okay, great. So, the third element in our theory of change is systems change. So someone in the chat asked, just for a clarification, where did the information for this evaluation report come from? So as a reminder, here's some of the ways that we've gathered information from you all, and we've shared information. We did that big collaborative capacity coalition member survey back in like May, some of you in June, that really got a lot of information on some baseline conditions for how your coalition was being perceived by members. I went to the in-person PLCs and had lots of conversations and did lots of kind of information gathering with all of the materials there. We did interviews with many of the coalition leads, or gathered information kind of virtually through some other ways. And we used the systems change tracking worksheet to gather information on small wins and systems changes that have been happening. Note that for any systems change that was identified, my evaluation team had an interview with folks outside of the coalition to kind of like substantiate, so to speak, and learn more about those changes and what else could be built on. If the change happened within an organization inside the coalition, we got some documentation just to make sure that we fully understood the change. So lots of ways that information was gathered. It is possible, despite all of those different ways, that there may be some systems changes that happened before October that didn't make it into the report. If that's the case, let's just touch base afterwards, and I can absolutely like put them in to the report if they're there, and do any kind of behind the scenes work to make sure that we get the right information. But like Sarah had mentioned, it's just a good reminder for this next grant period to really use those systems change tracking worksheets to be gathering input on the changes that folks are seeing, partners are seeing, so that we can make sure that we're really understanding everything that's going on. All of those methods are described in probably more detail than you care about in the beginning of the report. So if you have additional questions, just turn there. So let's look at what were some of the small wins and systems changes that emerged across all the coalitions. This is like what everyone's excited about. So this graph shows you the systems changes, which are in dark green, the small wins, which are basically like the steps and wins that are leading us towards those bigger wins, and then the number of strategies that were prioritized in each of the areas. So collectively, coalitions contributed to 14 systems changes and 29 small wins over the last 16 months. Remember, we looked at this at a larger time window because some of the work that had started in the phase 1 planning period resulted in some changes. And we wanted to kind of like pull the time window out a bit to capture those because we know systems change is an unpredictable, evolving process. And so we're trying to see the big view of this. And this is more around learning, guys, than around like bean counting. And so we're trying to take the larger view. The most systems changes were in goal areas 4 and 5, and the most small wins were in areas 4, 5, and 9. So you can see the number of wins and changes kind of follow a similar pattern with the number of strategies prioritized, except for goal 7. Goal 7 is sort of like the kid not picked for the kickball team. So just again, a good reflection on what does this mean, and are there things that might need to be adjusted to make sure that that area 7 is also seeing some change in the whole portfolio. When I looked at the descriptions of how these changes happened, there seemed to be 3 pathways that they went through. The first pathway was information that was shared during a childcare coalition kind of meeting or a work group prompted a single coalition member to take action. So that systems change was kind of like within their own scope of influence. The second pathway was multiple coalition members were prompted to work together around an action. Again, usually more internal. And the third was coalition members worked with an external organization to help them take action or kind of collectively take action. And so you can read more about that in the report. But interesting just to kind of reflect on, there's different ways that these changes seem to be happening. So I pulled out each of the small wins and systems changes for your coalition in that customized report. And again, it's just like Sarah said, it's interesting to kind of see what is happening and what can we learn. And there's some inspiring stuff going on and some really good ideas that are starting to happen. And so I encourage you to really read through that table, especially in the areas where you're starting to make some changes, because there could be opportunities for shared learning and some synergies. Appendix E, which is towards the end, has more detailed descriptions for each of the systems changes. Again, this information came from interviews we did with folks, kind of neutral people involved in these changes. And we really tried to understand not only what the change involved, but also how the coalition contributed to that change. And it's really interesting to read some of the things that people say there on what they saw as really critical and beneficial, and the unique roles the coalition played to help them make those changes. So I encourage you to read through that because it's really some good stuff. One tool I wanted to show you and offer is called a run chart. I mentioned this back in June and some people's ears got perked. This is a tool that helps you track cumulative change over time. So the number of changes is on the x-axis and time is on the y-axis. And you can separate it out by different categories. So the little chart on the top right shows different counties. This is totally made up data. Changes that would have happened in different counties in a region. And you can just kind of track over time, are some counties experiencing more change than others? You can also separate these out by goal areas to see, again, are some goal areas seeing a lot of change and some seeing very little change? You can even separate this out in terms of coalition partners who are involved in different actions to see if there's some partners who are really involved in lots of actions and some that aren't. So there's multiple ways you could use this tool. I created a template that automatically generates these types of graphs for you if you're interested. I can send that out to folks, and I can even like touch base with you afterwards if you want help filling it out. But this is like a little goodie bag, part 1, that you might be able to use to understand the changes that are happening in your region over time and really reflect on some of the patterns you're seeing. One of the things I looked at in terms of how many changes and small wins are happening was, were there any differences in characteristics between different coalitions in terms of how much like capacity for systems change we're seeing? Because there were some coalitions that just were involved in initiating more changes than others. This is not meant to judge. It's just meant to observe and learn, because there are some coalitions that started out at different places at the beginning of this grant period. Some experienced more kind of shifts with how many regions were, coalition counties were joining their region, other factors. So this is not meant to like pull out, it's just meant for learning. But what I noticed is the coalitions that were involved in more changes, more small wins, tended to have more coalition meetings more frequently. They had coalition work groups. They had more continuity between phase one and this grant period. They had more strategies that they had prioritized for implementation. And they had more coalition members rating their collaborative capacity in their coalition as higher at baseline. Another interesting thing I saw is that the regions that had a mix of high and low density areas seemed to have more changes versus regions that had like all low or all high density. And in between, it was kind of a mix. But just interesting to reflect on some of the contextual constraints and factors that might be contributing to some of the patterns we're seeing. But for me, this says collectively, how can we think about making sure that coalitions are meeting frequently enough to get the work done, that they're launching and leveraging work groups, and they're really taking efforts to build that collaborative capacity, given some of the patterns that we're seeing. Okay, a couple more things, and then you get one more breakout group. So I looked at some data on a few of the systems changes that folks are trying to make related to the goal areas, specifically around TriShare and CBO engagement in pre-K for all. And so I just wanted to give you an update on kind of what the data is looking like since we looked at this last time back in the summer. So over the time period from the beginning of the grant to back in April to kind of end of September, you see some slight changes in how many regional employers are participating in TriShare. So the gray was April, the green is September. Couple regions, 4 and 10, saw bigger gains. They also have the highest population in the region, so that is most likely driving some of that. However, all of these gains need to be taken into context when you think about scale. So these numbers represent less than 0.5 of the total number of employer establishments in the region, according to the census. So it's very, very, very small. And so it just kind of goes back to thinking through how can we build the momentum and the scaling of some of these things to reach a larger number of employers in the regions. It's interesting to see too that the majority of employers participating in TriShare are actually childcare employers, over half, 54%. And so, again, just an important reflective moment of what does this tell us about how we might need to approach some of the engagement work, the outreach, the marketing differently to engage a broader section of the more industries, more kind of employer networks out there. Just something interesting for reflection. When you look at the number of licensed childcare, either homes or center providers participating in TriShare, again, there was some increases over time from April to September. This represents on average about 11% of the total number of licensed childcare providers. And so more, right, than what we saw in the employers. But again, a nice moment just to reflect on how else might we need to expand the strategies around this to get a larger proportion of childcare licensed homes and centers in the region. This we're going to continue tracking over time because these changes will require time. And so see this as just kind of a snapshot at this moment. This is really interesting, this next one. We looked at CBO, community-based organization providers who are participating in pre-K for all, compared to school-based or district-initiated childcare providers, and then comparing that to how many unfilled pre-K for all slots there were in each region. And so if you see that first column shows of the facilities that are offering pre-K for all, you have like, in some cases, roughly half of those facilities offering pre-K for all can be considered CBOs. That includes Head Starts, that includes for-profit, nonprofit, university settings. But in the next column over, when you look at the total number of CBOs in each region that are offering pre-K for all, it's much less. And this is interesting when you look at the final column, which shows how many unfilled pre-K for all slots were in each region. This data is from September. And so for me, just this tells us what opportunities might there be to further expand the number of CBOs participating in pre-K for all and understanding some of the specific barriers they're encountering to doing that. Fortunately, in your goodie bag today, you're going to have your own kind of regional data set for the CBOs in your region that are and are not participating in pre-K for all. And it even has their addresses and like license numbers. This took a little bit of work because there's several data sets that don't always match up that we had to work through to get to this place. And we're working with the state to clean up some of those things so we'll have better data moving forward. But this is our best estimate. And so I'll send you that link afterwards, and you can take a look at just the data for your region that can inform some of the conversations you might be having to problem solve that. Okay, so let's do another quick breakout group. That took a little bit more time to describe all that than I was anticipating. Right, we have a choosing your own adventure moment here. I'm going to open up the Hollywood Squares. We can do a breakout group on the systems change stuff, or I can go through the last bit on childcare supply, and then we can have a longer large group discussion at the end. If folks would like to do the longer discussion at the end, can you raise your hand? If you don't raise your hand, I'm assuming you're going to do the breakout. Okay. Dang, that is not as representative as I. Oh, there's little hands. Okay, there's little hands. Perfect. The icon hands. Okay, cool. Let's do a larger breakout at the end then. Okay, let me make you small again. Okay, so when we are done with this meeting and you're talking with your group back in your home spaces, I would just encourage you to look through those tables in your customized report. And just like you did in the other breakout group, think about what are some opportunities for shared learning? What are some systems changes to become inspired by? Like, wow, that might really work in our region. And reflect on some of the ways that your coalition might learn from the trends we're seeing across coalitions to make to increase your capacity for systems change. Okay, I'm assuming folks who still have their hands raised were just because I asked you to raise your hands, and not because you have a question, like Shanae in particular. Do you have a question? Okay, perfect, awesome. Okay, let's go through the last bit and then we'll have some time at the end. So childcare supply, this is like the whole reason d'etre of why we're doing this, right? Is to increase childcare supply. It's at the end of our theory of change. And I looked at the data from the MSU maps, which we know have some caveats methodologically that make it imperfect, but it's the data that we have available right now. And so that's what we're going with. So if you look at the data between April 2022, back several years ago, and September 2025, you see that there's slight variation, but nothing like huge going on. There's like between 5 and 6% shifts in 0 to 5 care, some slightly larger in toddler care, but all regions showed between April 2025 and September 2025, some decrease in infant toddler slots and 0 to 5 care. So the percentage change in regions was narrower than between 2022 and 2025, which tells me that most regions are experiencing somewhat similar dynamics affecting their childcare. But you can look into the report to see your specific changes for your region. And I also noticed that there's higher fluctuation than I had anticipated in month-to-month numbers. And so we're going to start, the evaluation is going to start tracking month-to-month supply numbers just to see if there's any interesting patterns that we need to be paying attention to. So go into the report and you can see specifics on the supply for your area. I also included some graphs that show the percentage of providers who are adding slots, staying neutral, or decreasing slots. And there's one for centers and there's one for family and group-based providers. And overall, what I saw is that there's a higher percentage of family and group home providers who are adding slots to their capacity compared to centers, which is an interesting trend that we should understand more. That's the problem always with quantitative data is there's so many questions that you can ask afterwards, but this might be an interesting topic for your coalition meetings is to understand what's driving some of these patterns in your region and what might that tell us about strategies. All right. One other thing just to think about when I was looking at the stories of change that were coming out is that there's several specific examples where some of the systems changes that coalitions are working on are starting to like result in new childcare supply being created. In fact, I just learned about one today that wasn't in the report. But there's some, like for example, in Region 4 with the Head Start and GSRP blended funding that's resulting in increase in slots. In Region 3, some of the childcare back office work is like literally creating new providers, creating more slots. The zoning ordinances in Region 5, there's evidence that there's new providers who are emerging out of that because of those changes. And I heard in Region 8, there was also some efforts that were resulting in new supply, new slots. So it's working in other ways, like the systems changes are starting to result in actual supply increases. However, everyone talked about continuing system policy barriers that are constraining some of those increases. Things like huge delays in state fire marshal inspections and sort of standards that don't really make a whole lot of sense. Some state childcare licensing delays, quality rating delays, like 6 to 12-month delays, and some state tax code exemptions that again are like constraining some of the movement. Good news is there's some movement at the state level to address some of these areas, but they still remain. One thing I noticed is that some coalitions were kind of like using their own social and political capital sometimes to help provide direct assistance to providers to overcome these barriers, which helped, on a one-on-one basis, people to overcome those barriers and increase their slots. But it's not sustainable or scalable. And so it tells me that all of us need to collectively think about continuing to address these large system policy barriers so that everyone can have an easier path towards supply building and it's not reliant on coalitions like finding those individuals and providing one-on-one assistance. Okay, almost at the end. I know this is like a lot of information, but it's all in your report, which I'm sure you've read and memorized at this point. Okay, so there's a couple recommendations that I wanted to highlight for coalitions. There was also some recommendations for ECIC and state partners in the report, but I'm just going to highlight the ones for coalitions. One is, given everything that we're learning, there seems to be a benefit to activating partners to address multiple root causes across multiple initiative goal areas. So we're all learning that these complex supply issues are driven by multiple things. And some of the coalitions talked about seeing their systems change process accelerated by working on multiple causes simultaneously, like policy changes, creative facility solutions, workforce issues. However, coalitions talked about how challenging it is to focus on all these goal areas at the same time. there's 9 of them. That's a lot. And so one idea that you're seeing several coalitions really lean into is how to activate or spark members and partners in the region to be inspired and informed about new ideas, and then the coalition like supports them to take those ideas and run with them. So the coalition doesn't need to be the one like doing all the work. They're more in a role of, again, like informing, inspiring, and supporting, and then helping to scale some of the ideas that are coming out. And this can be a way to manage the overwhelm with so many different project goals, is to really think differently about what is your role within these regions to strategically create lots of action. Another recommendation, given what everyone shared, is to really leverage work groups, not only to like accelerate the change, but also to create new opportunities for engagement with sectors that may be more reluctant to engage in the coalition. So the coalitions that had work groups were not only more likely to create change, but they also were more likely to engage underrepresented sectors in their efforts, regardless if they became official coalition members. And a couple folks, including like Janie, talked about how the EDOs in her region were more likely to join like a work group on very concrete, tangible topics versus join a coalition, just given the nature of their work. And I trust Janie because she's an EDO herself. And you can talk to her more if you want some of her lived experience with that. So just really thinking carefully about how do we leverage those work groups to engage people who may not be ready to do the full coalition. And then finally, building on that conversation we had earlier, just really thinking about how can we enhance the collective portfolio of strategies so that they're designed to create sustainable reinforcing systems changes, so that you're tilling the soil and planting things that will survive past the lifetime of your coalitions. That's always the goal. And so really helping each other kind of think about creative ways to enhance the work you're doing so it's more sustainable. There were some comments about technical assistance that were really, really helpful for Joan and team. You shared some great topics that are actually informing the PLC topics and some of the other resources that are happening this next period. You talked about some ideas for restructuring the PLCs to really highlight success stories, give more opportunities for discussion. I know those are being used. And there's also some ideas about how can we create more opportunities for one-on-one coaching. So all of these technical assistance ideas are in the works. I'm watching them happen behind the scenes. And so thanks for being honest with sharing that feedback. It's really going to help increase the value of the TA offered. Okay, wow, I'm done talking. That was a lot of talking, a bit of a fire hose. But I'm just going to stop sharing now and open it up. We got 10 minutes here for discussion. I would say just have people unmute if there's questions or comments or reflections or ideas that this has sparked for you, and let's just use this as a collective time.
This is Jordan. I'm from Region 5. One of the reflections that I had in looking through the strategies across coalitions is that I was curious about some things which sound like we're doing the same thing, but we've worded it differently. And then there are some things where maybe we're trying to get to the same end, but are using different tools. And so specifically, when I was looking at the municipal engagement, I saw it looks like there are at least 3 different things that municipalities might receive from their coalition as like guidance. And it brought up a concern for me that is there a fundamental different zoning ordinance requirement outside of the redevelopment ready childcare toolkit that we think needs to be involved? And I just the sense of like, zoning ordinance and how we're helping municipalities, is there any desire among other coalitions to like collaboratively talk about how we want to engage those players as regional coalitions so that they're getting a similar experience when that makes sense and getting a customized experience when it doesn't?
Jordan, could I ask a question for clarification? Are you speaking to specifically as RRC Toolkit as being the sole source or among other resources to communicate out to the local jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think what I want to know is, what are all of the things we're giving? Why are people giving something other than the redevelopment ready toolkit? I know I give individual recommendations of evaluations of their zoning ordinances, so it's not the only thing I give. But if somebody's got a really good toolkit that they like better than that redevelopment ready toolkit, I want to use it. I want to give people the thing that's going to make them change.
Could I provide some additional context for clarification? Because I live, laugh, love the RRC, but we work with individual municipalities where in order to become RRC engaged with the MEDC, it is a very long, tedious process that sometimes requires additional funds. And what we've seen is that that sometimes is a barrier individually for those smaller communities. So I'm wondering, to your early point, like, is there something that's a little bit more simplified beyond the RRC toolkit that is more of like a pre-step? Because I do know a barrier to that program for municipalities is the time and energy it takes. We don't have very many except larger municipalities here in our region that partake of it. And even though we work with them in handhold, that is something that I know is a barrier to accessing that program. So maybe there's something else like before that, because that's part of it, is that it hasn't always gotten a lot of attention because of the amount of work that it requires to become RRC engaged. And then you're adding this toolkit on it.
If I can, Emma, before the toolkit was developed, Pulse had worked with our municipal leaders to create a municipal roadmap that is on our website. That is probably like the step before the RRC toolkit. But I also know that the RRC toolkit does not require you to be redevelopment ready certified. It's for any municipality to use. There's a self-audit in there. What it may do is limit your amount of TA you get from MEDC, but I was under the impression that even that might be supported, and we can clarify that. But the roadmap on Pulse's website is a good place to start. Just it was written in pretty plain language by municipal leaders, and it was actually built off of something that came out of the I'm gonna forget it. There's a group that is a national group that focuses on municipal efforts, and I'll get the research for that and share it with you in a minute. It's just escaping me. The League of Cities, National League of Cities. It was NLC. Just came back to me.
Yeah, and there's actually like 3 tierings, right? I mean, there's certified and there's some other level, and then there's a level below that. So all of them are in a direction.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not talking to any municipality about whether they are a redevelopment ready community. I am working with municipalities who are saying, I'm interested in making it easier for families to live here and childcare to flourish. What should I do? And so because of the angle I'm coming from, no one is expecting me to expect them to do more than like take the advice. And so Emma, if your experience is that if we give a toolkit that's got that name on it, it's going to make people not even want to look at it. That is really helpful for me to know, to make sure that we're sending things in a way that people will want to engage with what's in there.
Yeah, thank you for getting to my point quicker than my brain could work. I think that's where I'm coming from, is because, Kathy, to your point, I know that you don't have to be RRC engaged, but because of the credibility of that program, having established the amount of work, especially in the smaller communities or townships, that is seen initially, like with that word attachment, as more work than what some have cut out. And some folks likely do not know that you do not have to be an engaged partner in that prior to establishing that. So
thanks, Emma.
Any final reflections folks have?
I guess my overall sense is that this has been quite remarkable and incredible what you've put together. I was had so much work to do, and I was working, and then I was like, well, I'm gonna go to bed, and it was like 1 a.m. in the morning, and I kind of took your evaluation thing into to bed, and I had to say I could not put it down.
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh.
literally was like I had to make myself stop looking and reading, and it's just so rich with analysis and different ways to look at it. And so, we just have to push ourselves to kind of get through it. It's remarkable what the different angles and the way that you looked at. And I think, I don't know, for me, maybe I just like you simplified even in the presentation today, kind of how we can zero in, and get that where that's part of our regular practice, kind of a way to approach the work. And I'm gonna have to go through it again. So then it's part of my lens by which I move forward and engage folks in the coalition itself. I mean, I think it was very helpful to kind of see these goals more clear than I had them in my mind, and kind of the connections. I still think that maybe I need some technical assistance from you just to kind of delve in, because you really simplified it today, for which has been a lot of, and you helped us to see it. And if you're going to move forward in it, us understanding it like as an evaluation plan, if you will help us perform better, that it's not just developmental, that we do want some clear outcomes in this, and how do we move there. And you could see what we did understand emerged. Three of the goals emerged really strongly. And so anyways, I think as we noodle through that, so it's part of our practice, and the way that we design coalition meetings and subgroups is going to be really helpful.
Just so you know, I'm trying to attend all the progress meetings just so I can, like, in real time bring in some of the insights from the evaluation. So I'll try my best to make that easier to do so you don't have to like hold all that stuff in your brain. And I'm also partnering with the TA so that it's like really tightly linked to what we learned. So we're trying to make that as easy as possible, Shanae. But
I think there's an
like literally read that at night.
I think there's an opportunity for a cheat sheet, if you will,
Got it.
that kind of just gives us a conceptual view, sort of kind of that was emerging in how I was seeing it today, with greater clarity than I've had. So that will help us all, I think. And I see Selena saying, yes.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
And-
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, with that, we do need to close. It's 3:30.
Okay, really quick in the chat, that's the drop link to the CBO database, and each of your regions has a tab. So just click that open before you close. And that's the data that I had mentioned before in the goodie bag.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being with us today. We look forward to hearing from you. Please don't forget that individual consultation is available to you at any time. Please reach out to technical assistance at ecicforkids.org, and we're happy to schedule time with you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.